Three of the world's most brilliant minds once tried and failed. One went mad. One retired in shame. One died believing it was unsolvable. Yet sometime past midnight, under flickering fluorescent lights, in the west wing of the National Institute of Pure Mathematics. The problem was solved. Not by a Fields medalist, not by a tenured professor, but by a janitor. No applause, no chalk drop, no photos. Only a silent figure in a faded U.S. Marine uniform with streaks of white in his long hair wiped the dust off the board, with his sleeve, laid the chalk down gently, and left behind 6 simple words, scrawled at the bottom, "Truth needs no title." ML, by dawn the Institute would be in uproar. But by then the man was already gone, mop bucket rolling quietly behind him. If this story already has you curious, tell us where you're reading from. Like if you've ever believed someone was more than what they seemed. Drop a comment. Who do you think ML is? Let's dive in. Dr. Bernard Ackley, head of the Department of Geometric Analysis, arrived early as always. His coffee still steamed in a silver travel mug as he stepped into Lecture Hall B3 and froze. The board had been wiped clean just yesterday. Now it was filled. Dense lines of chalk etched across all 3 panels, 2 full proofs, 3 auxiliary lemmas, and at the center. No. Ackley breathed. It can't be. It was there, the monster of the Institute. The Barlow-Takahashi conjecture on compact differential symmetries. A problem left untouched since 1953. The last person who dared claim progress had been laughed out of Princeton. Ackley dropped his briefcase. He looked around wildly. The chalk tray was spotless, the room empty. Only the final line remained smaller than the rest, as if almost forgotten. Truth needs no title. ML, 4 floors above the man behind those initials, stood quietly in the janitor's supply room, folding his cleaning rag with military precision. His name was Marcus Lee. To most at the Institute, Marcus was invisible. Just another quiet maintenance guy with odd habits, spoke rarely cleaned obsessively, and always wore an old sun-faded military jacket under his apron. He was never late, never complained, never lingered, and never made a sound when entering a room. Today he hummed softly to himself a tune only he recognized. It wasn't victory. It wasn't pride. It was closure. The Barlow-Takahashi conjecture, once dubbed the Everest of post-war mathematics, had stumped 3 generations. Mathematicians from Cambridge to Caltech had tried to prove or disprove its central claim that any third-degree asymmetric manifold in non-compact form could be reduced through an invariant differential bridge without loss of boundary behavior. Hundreds of pages of failed attempts filled dusty cabinets. Until now. Marcus hadn't slept. He never did much anyway. But last night the pieces had clicked like old gears oiled after decades. It wasn't in a journal. It wasn't in a classroom. It was in his mind and on that chalkboard. Meanwhile, across the hallway, Dr. Sophia Langley, the Institute's rising star in classical geometry, arrived balancing a bagel and a stack of lecture notes. She passed B3 without glancing in until she noticed Ackley standing like a statue. Dr. Ackley, everything all right? She asked. He didn't speak, just pointed. Sophia stepped in, then froze. Her bagel slipped from her hand. She knew that proof. Not the specifics. Not yet. But the structure, the symmetry. It was genius in motion, elegant, precise, terrifyingly simple in its depth. Her fingers traced an involuntary line in the air as her eyes followed the chalk. No name, no erasures, no struggle marks, just raw, clean thought. She whispered, "Who the hell is ML?" The security footage showed nothing. No one unauthorized had entered the lecture hall after hours. No faculty, no students, no visitors. Just maintenance logs. Marcus Lee floor. 3:10:07 p.m. to 2:45 a.m. Back in the janitor's closet, Marcus pulled a folded piece of notebook paper from his pocket. On it, hand-drawn, was a simplified model of the conjecture, one he'd refined for years in private folding theorems, in his mind, like origami. He heard a small voice behind him. "Daddy, did you solve another big one?" A girl with tangled dark hair peeked from behind the door, Ellie, age 7, holding a plastic compass and a sheet filled with scribbled spirals. Marcus smiled gently. "Maybe just cleaned up an old mess someone left." She giggled. "Was it messy like the bathroom yesterday?" "Worse," he said with a wink. "Much worse." At 9:32 a.m., the Institute's internal server buzzed with whispers, screenshots, rumors, chalkboard photos. By 10:15, a memo had gone out to all departments. "Effective immediately, we are launching an internal investigation into the anonymous mathematical work discovered in Lecture Hall B3. All staff with access to that floor are asked to report for interviews. This is a matter of scientific integrity and institutional security." Major General Rourke, director of NIPM. Marcus didn't blink. He finished cleaning the floor near the administrative wing, picked up Ellie from the staff daycare at noon, and walked her home under gray November clouds. That night, he'd sit at the battered blackboard in their tiny apartment. Once again, chalk in one hand, Ellie on his lap. No fanfare, just mathematics. And the daughter he loved more than any proof. The apartment wasn't much, just 2 rooms stacked like tired bones above a laundromat on the east side of Arlington. The paint peeled in the corners, the heating hissed like an asthmatic cat, and the windows never quite closed all the way in winter. But in the middle of it all, standing proud in a sun-drenched nook between the kitchen and the pull-out couch, was a blackboard, 6 feet across, rimmed in worn oak, its surface always clean and ready. Above it hung a single brass lamp, the kind found in old libraries and war rooms. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't nostalgia. It was home. This was where Marcus Lee spent his nights, not in front of a television, not in a bar, like so many other veterans haunted by shadows, but here with chalk in one hand and peace in the other. And always right beside him was Ellie. "Okay, sweetheart," Marcus said, setting a mug of warm milk on the table. "Where did we leave off last night?" Ellie hopped onto the stool with a grin, her frizzy hair tied up in a loose bun that made her look more like a miniature professor than a child. The thing with the folding square and the line that doesn't curve but also isn't straight." Marcus chuckled. "Ah, the geodesic," she pronounced it carefully. "Desic, close enough." He picked up a piece of chalk and with smooth precision drew a folded paper figure, a square base with a twisting line bisecting it from corner to corner. Then he motioned for her to take the chalk. Ellie hesitated. "Are you sure it's the good side of the board?" "It's all yours, Professor Lee." She beamed, then carefully began tracing the triangle formed by the creases. The chalk squeaked, but her hand was steady. "You said it's like walking straight on a curved planet," she said, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. "Exactly," Marcus said. "Even if the space bends, the shortest path stays true." He leaned back, watching her work. "Kinda like you and me, huh?" she added quietly. Marcus froze just for a beat. Then he smiled. "Yeah, kinda like us." The blackboard had been a gift from Marcus to himself 8 years ago after Ellie was born, and the nightmares came roaring back. It was used, scratched, rescued from a university renovation. He'd traded a week's wages and a broken-down van to haul it up 2 flights of stairs by himself. But once it was mounted, the room changed. He never told Ellie, but he'd solved his first major proof on this board in the dead of night, when she was still swaddled in a crib nearby. The math soothed him. gave his mind rails to run on so it wouldn't fall into the ravines of memory. The clock ticked past 9 p.m. Ellie was nodding off mid-equation, her small hand gripping the chalk like it was a magic wand. Marcus gently took it from her fingers. "All right, time for bed." "But we didn't do the paper fold parabola yet," she murmured. "Tomorrow. The fold can wait." He lifted her in his arms. She was light, too light, and he made a mental note to check if the fridge still had enough eggs and tucked her into the pull-out couch under layers of mismatched blankets. She stirred once. "Daddy, yeah, why don't you go teach at the institute like the other smart people?" Marcus hesitated, crouched beside her. "Because the blackboard here is cleaner," he said, brushing a curl from her forehead. "But wouldn't you want more people to see your math?" He looked at the board, then at her. "Sweetheart," he said softly. "Sometimes, it's not about being seen. It's about seeing clearly." She blinked sleepily. "Is that another math thing?" Maybe. Later that night, when the building was silent and the city dimmed under a blanket of fog, Marcus sat alone at the blackboard. He erased the geodesic from earlier and in its place began reconstructing the Barlow-Takahashi conjecture, not from memory, but from intuition. There was a rhythm to it now, like music dissonant at first, then resolving into a chord. He worked slowly, methodically, eyes narrowing with each pass. Symbols flowed, balanced, merged, refracted across the surface of the board, like light through stained glass. His hands were chalk white by midnight. Somewhere around 1:00 a.m. he stopped. A single line stared back at him, where MFXYZ Marcus blinked, stunned. It was elegant, like it had always been there, waiting for someone to stop trying and start listening. He sat back, heart pounding, not with fear, not even pride, but with release. This wasn't a solution for fame, not for publication. It was for Ellie, who thought math was magic. It was for himself to remind his mind it could still build, not just remember. And maybe it was for someone out there who'd see it, not for the name at the bottom, but for the truth inside it. Somewhere across town, in a lab still echoing with confused whispers, Sophia Langley sat in front of her computer, cross-referencing chalkboard images with archived publications. ML, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Who writes something like that and walks away? She clicked into the maintenance logs. Marcus Lee, floor 3, time logged 10:07 p.m., 2:45 a.m. Her eyes narrowed. She leaned back in her chair. "Well," then she whispered, "let's see who you really are." Dr. Sophia Langley never trusted easy answers, especially not the kind that showed up in the dead of night with no author and no context, solving a 72-year-old mathematical enigma that had broken minds stronger than hers. She stared at the photo of the chalkboard once more, its symmetry almost mocking her. Truth needs no title. Whoever ML was, they weren't just brilliant. They were deliberate, arrogant even. It infuriated her. Sophia had built her entire career on precision. As a specialist in classical geometry and topological theory, she was known for her meticulous, borderline obsessive approach to proof structures. The mathematics community whispered her name with both reverence and wariness. She wasn't the youngest tenured professor in the Institute's history. That title belonged to someone long dead. But she was the only one to challenge Rourke in public more than once and survive. Now she stood alone in Lecture Hall B3, arms folded across her tailored navy blazer, eyes locked on the nearly erased remnants still faint on the board. The janitor had done a thorough job, but even chalk has memory. She could still trace the Fermat-type symmetry in the side lemma. The curvature patterns reminded her of Bianchi's identities, but simplified through a lens she'd never considered. No student she knew could write like this. No professor she respected had ever come close. And yet, ML had done it, in silence, with grace, with no audience. Sophia's heels echoed through the institute corridors as she marched to the internal archives office. "Morning, Dr. Langley," mumbled the clerk, sipping his third coffee. "Morning, Ben. I need personnel access. Faculty number maintenance." Ben blinked. "Seriously," she slid a post-it across the counter. "ML, 10:07 p.m. to 2:45 a.m. floor November 12th. He frowned, then began typing. Only one maintenance log during that window. Marcus Lee. She leaned in. File. Ben squinted. Former Marine. Joined staff 7 years ago. No academic degrees listed. Lives in Arlington. Works graveyard shift. No infractions. No complaints. Keeps to himself. Sophia narrowed her eyes. Photos. He clicked. A grainy ID badge appeared on screen. A tall man, mid-40s, long dark hair streaked with gray face, lined by years more than age. No smile. Eyes sharp. Marine, huh, she muttered. Yep. Got discharged after Fallujah. Decorated, but what? Ben hesitated. Word is he doesn't talk about it. PTSD, maybe. Keeps his distance. Sophia stared at the screen. She didn't blink. This wasn't over. She found him later that afternoon in Corridor 2F, mopping near the physics wing. Mr. Lee Marcus looked up. For a moment they just regarded each other. She was tall, poised, sharp-jawed. He was taller, but slouched in that way veterans do not defeated just conserving presence. His mop paused mid-sweep. Yes, I'm Dr. Sophia Langley. I believe you know something about the equation found in Lecture Hall B3. He blinked slowly. I clean that room, that's all. She didn't move. You're more than a janitor. He raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, most days I'm not even that good. Sophia stepped closer. You solved a conjecture that's been open since Eisenhower was president. Do you really think you can just walk away from that? I didn't ask the world to knock, Marcus said quietly. I just opened a door in my mind and let the dust out. Sophia didn't know what to say to that. She'd prepared a dozen arguments. She thought she'd be chasing some imposter or attention-seeking eccentric. But this man, he was different. Worn. Quiet. Dangerously exact. You studied math, didn't you? She asked. He nodded slowly. Before what Marcus's grip tightened on the mop handle. Before I learned that math can't protect you from shrapnel or bureaucracy. Sophia's voice softened. We're not the enemy, Mr. Lee. He smiled faintly. Maybe not. But academia, it has its own wars. Silence stretched between them. Then he added, I'm not interested in fame, doctor. I don't want tenure. I don't want to be interviewed. I don't want to sit on committees. I just want to raise my daughter, pay my rent, and maybe solve something that makes her eyes light up. Sophia exhaled. She wasn't used to being disarmed this quickly. You should at least let us credit your work. I left my name. Initials. Marcus returned to mopping. That's more than most ghosts get. Back in her office, Sophia paced. Her gut twisted with a feeling she hadn't had in years. Admiration. Not the textbook kind. Not peer-reviewed. Raw respect. This man was walking brilliance. But he wasn't wounded in the way she thought. He wasn't hiding out of fear, he was choosing silence. And that made her want to shout. That evening, as twilight crept over the glass dome of the Institute, Sophia pulled out her private research file, an unsolved inequality she'd been wrestling with for months. Something about the curvature constraints under fractal folding kept eluding her. She stared at it for a long time. Then grabbing a pen, she wrote at the top of the page, Let's see what the janitor thinks. The cafeteria at the National Institute of Pure Mathematics was quiet at 3:00 p.m. Too late for lunch, too early for dinner. Just the occasional hum of vending machines and the clink of spoons against ceramic mugs. Dr. Sophia Langley didn't usually come here at this hour, but today wasn't usual. She sat near the far window, distractedly stirring her coffee eyes, occasionally darting toward the maintenance wing. Her thoughts were tangled not in variables and theorems, but in a man with no credentials and the mind of a savant who refused to be acknowledged. She had a folder with her, the inequality she'd been working on for months. Half resigned, she opened it once again. Same tangled boundary conditions, same stubborn divergence where there should have been convergence. She rubbed her temples. It's like trying to fold a tornado. Do you like folding things too? A small voice chirped from across the table. Sophia blinked. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, had wandered over holding a tray with a paper napkin, a carton of chocolate milk, and what looked like a notebook full of crayon scribbles. She wore a red hoodie 2 sizes too big, and sneakers that lit up every time she moved. Sophia blinked again. "Sorry, I said, do you like folding stuff?" the girl repeated, pulling herself into the seat across from her as naturally as if they were old friends. "My dad says geometry is just polite paper folding." Sophia's eyebrow rose. "Your dad? He's the janitor here. Marcus Lee." Sophia sat up straighter. "You're Ellie." The girl grinned. "Yup, I'm Ellie Lee. I'm almost 8. But I skipped 2nd grade, so I guess I'm smart. That's what Mrs. Crandall says." Sophia smiled despite herself. "Nice to meet you, Ellie." Ellie placed her napkin flat on the table, then pulled a pencil from her hoodie pocket and began folding it into precise diagonal creases. "This is called a Sierpinski fold," she explained, carefully aligning edges. "Daddy taught me. It makes infinite triangles if you keep going." Sophia leaned in, intrigued. The folds were precise, perfect even. The napkin now resembled a fractal pattern Sophia had once spent a semester modeling in MATLAB. "You know what a fractal is?" she asked gently. Ellie didn't look up. Of course. They're shapes that look the same no matter how close you zoom in, like snowflakes, or mountains, or my dad's hair when it's messy. That last part made Sophia chuckle. Then Ellie handed her the notebook. "Want to see something weird?" Sophia opened it and froze. Inside were pages of hand-drawn diagrams, sequences of recursive spirals, and labeled constructions with names like impossible circle asymmetric bridge, Ellie's hypothesis. There were no equations, just visual logic. But it was there. The mathematics. Raw. Untamed. Bursting from the margins. This is yours, Sophia." Asked, stunned. "Me and Daddy," Ellie said proudly. "He makes up the problems. I try to draw them. But sometimes I get mad and draw aliens instead." True enough, there was a doodle of an alien sipping juice on one corner. Sophia flipped to the last page. A crude crayon-colored map showed an object folding into itself in 4 dimensions, an abstract version of a hypersphere inversion that Sophia had once failed to explain to a room full of grad students. She looked up slowly. "Ellie, has anyone ever told you this is brilliant?" The girl tilted her head. "Nope, but Daddy says we don't need anyone to clap for us if we already know it's beautiful." Sophia's chest tightened. The simplicity, the clarity, the truth. Not performed, not published. Just lived. Later that evening she waited. Quietly. She sat on the stone bench outside corridor 2F, pretending to scroll her phone, though her eyes flicked up every time she heard wheels squeak. Finally she saw them. Marcus pushed the mop bucket slowly, Ellie skipping beside him, chattering about origami frogs and Mobius bands. He nodded patiently, letting her go on, his tired eyes warm. Sophia stood. "Mr. Lee." He paused, looked up. Ellie waved. "Hi again, lady. Who likes folding?" Marcus frowned slightly. "You two met over fractals," Sophia said, holding up the notebook. She showed me a Sierpinski fold, then casually handed me a visual proof. I'm pretty sure violates the boundaries of 3 textbooks. Marcus looked mildly alarmed. She wasn't bothering you. She humbled me, Sophia said. In the best way. Ellie beamed. Sophia took a breath. Marcus, I need to ask you something and I want a real answer this time. He waited. Why hide? She asked. Why solve something that monumental and then scrub your name off the board? Marcus looked away, eyes drifting toward the far hallway. For a moment it seemed he might walk off again. Then he sighed. I wasn't always a janitor, Dr. Langley. I know, she said gently. Fallujah. His jaw tightened. I used to believe that numbers were the last pure thing in the world. But after what I saw, after what I did, I started to question whether purity was ever real to begin with. Sophia's voice dropped. You think your past disqualifies you from truth? I think truth doesn't need my name. It just needs to live. There was a silence. Ellie looked between them, fidgeting with the edge of her hoodie. Then she said softly, Is Daddy in trouble for being smart? Marcus crouched beside her. No, sweetheart. I'm just not sure the world knows what to do with smart people who mop floors. Sophia knelt too. Well, she said, her voice calm, maybe the world needs to learn. The archives at the National Institute of Pure Mathematics were buried literally beneath 2 sublevels of reinforced concrete, sealed behind a keypad door and manned by a woman named Doris, who had once threatened to lock a visiting professor inside for sneezing too loudly near her microfiche. You want what Doris squinted at Sophia Langley over the rim of her bifocals. I need everything we have on Marcus Lee. Sophia said, placing a form on the counter. Personnel files, project affiliations, and academic records, if any. Doris raised a skeptical eyebrow. That janitor. Just run the name. With a theatrical sigh, Doris spun her chair and began typing. The humming of old machinery filled the room. Sophia glanced around, impatient. Shelves stretched like rows of tombstones. Every file in this place had once belonged to a genius, a failure, or both. 10 minutes later, Doris let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be. She turned the screen toward Sophia. Marcus David Lee, enlisted U.S. Marine Corps, 1999, deployed Iraq. Fallujah, 2004, discharged honorably. 2006, PTSD diagnosis confirmed. Prior to service, O accepted into MIT Mathematics. 1998, O deferred, O accepted again in 2001. Full ride, O participated in DUD Math Integration Initiative under Professor Alton Greaves, O nominated for NSA Black Project clearance in 2005, O disappeared from academic records post-2006. Sophia leaned closer. What's the DOD Math Integration Initiative? Doris shrugged. Top secret. Most of it's redacted. Only thing we know is that it recruited the brightest young minds in theoretical mathematics and applied logic to support battlefield decision systems. Math as a weapon. Sophia's stomach turned, and Professor Greaves retired. Lives in Vermont now. Last paper he published was, wait, here it is. Doris tapped the screen and read aloud. Of the thousands I've taught, only one ever made me doubt the limits of human cognition. He never finished his degree, but he understood truth in a way most men only dream of. A. Greaves, 2009, on the lost prodigies beneath it, Sophia saw the dedication for MDL. May your silence be by choice, not by exile. Her heart skipped. That evening, Sophia sat at her desk in stunned quiet. The photo of the chalkboard from Lecture Hall B3 was still open on her monitor. The handwriting, precise, elegant, now carried a new weight. Marcus wasn't just some gifted hobbyist. He was a mathematical ghost, one the Department of Defense had tried to turn into a weapon and then quietly erased when he broke. And he had returned, not as a hero, not as a professor, but as a man with a mop and a daughter. The next morning, she found Marcus in the back courtyard cleaning the Institute's old sundial. You were in the DoD math program, she said, without preamble. Marcus didn't flinch. Took you long enough. Why didn't you finish? He paused, then stood upright, the morning sun catching the streaks of gray in his hair. There was a child, he said quietly. In Fallujah. 8 years old. Wrong place, wrong time. Sophia waited. The model I'd helped build was supposed to minimize civilian risk. That day, it failed. He looked her in the eyes. I did everything right on paper, and she still died. So I stopped trusting paper. Sophia's throat tightened. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't hers either. They stood in silence. The sundial cast a thin shadow across the stone. Finally, she said, "You don't have to stay hidden." Marcus shook his head. The world likes its geniuses tidy, polished, with degrees, awards, curated lectures, not PTSD, calloused hands, and a janitor's badge. But your work, your mind, it's worth more than the job title stapled to your jacket, he chuckled. Funny. I used to think that too. But Ellie doesn't care about titles. She just wants me home in time for story night. Sophia folded her arms. And what if the story she's telling herself is that you gave up? Marcus looked at her sharply. She's watching you, Marcus. Sophia continued. Every day. Every decision. And whether you mean to or not, you're teaching her what a brilliant person is allowed to be. He exhaled. I'm not afraid of being seen, Dr. Langley. I'm afraid of believing again and watching it all collapse. Sophia softened. Then don't believe in the system. Believe in her. That night, in the small apartment above the laundromat, Marcus sat at the blackboard, while Ellie curled beside him, tracing shapes on her drawing pad. Daddy, she asked sleepily. Yes, Bug. Did someone find out you're smart again? He smiled faintly. Maybe. Are they mad? He chuckled. Some are. But are you mad? Marcus thought for a moment. No. Just remembering. Ellie looked up. Can I still be a math person if I'm scared sometimes? He leaned down and kissed her forehead. That's the only way to be one. Meanwhile, in her office, Sophia stared at an email draft she had rewritten 12 times. To Roarcump Gov, subject, anonymous solution, fields level proof. Her finger hovered, then she hit send, but not before attaching something else. A scanned page from a notebook, drawn in crayon, titled Ellie's Hypothesis. The lecture hall was packed. Word had spread like wildfire through the institute. Dr. Sophia Langley was presenting a groundbreaking alternative approach to the Barlow-Takahashi conjecture. The announcement had only gone out the night before, yet even the back row was standing room only. What no one knew except Sophia was that the proof she planned to unveil wasn't hers. And she wasn't going to pretend it was. Not this time. High above the rows of students, fellows and researchers, General Rourke, director of the National Institute of Pure Mathematics, stood at the back balcony, like a hawk surveying prey. He didn't attend lectures often, but the attached note Sophia had slipped under his door, attend. You'll want to see this, was enough to trigger his curiosity. Rourke didn't trust Langley. She was brilliant, yes, but independent to a fault. Always asking questions she wasn't supposed to ask. Always pushing back. And today he had a strange feeling she was about to push harder than ever. Meanwhile, in the back of the hall beneath the stage behind the side curtains, Marcus Lee rolled a mop bucket down the corridor, completely unnoticed. He wasn't there to eavesdrop. Cleaning staff rotated through the lecture rooms every morning, and this one happened to fall on his schedule. He paused just as Sophia stepped on stage. Something in the air made him stop moving. He recognized that tension. The seconds before a battle. Sophia took the podium in silence. She didn't begin with a title, or a thank you, or a joke. She simply clicked the remote. The projector lit up behind her with a massive black-on-white reproduction of the proof from Lecture Hall B3. The same one Marcus had written in silence. The same one he thought had been erased and forgotten. The room fell completely still. Murmurs rippled. Pencils froze. A few students leaned in with a mix of awe and confusion. Sophia cleared her throat. This, she said, was discovered on a chalkboard 2 nights ago. No author, no publication trail, just a message at the bottom. Truth needs no title. ML, she waited, then added, I'm not here to present my own work. I'm here to honor someone else's. Gasps rose from the crowd. Rourke's jaw clenched. Sophia continued, whoever ML is, they did what no one else could for 72 years. They reduced the central nonlinear symmetry into a series of harmonic constraints that not only close the loop, but offer a constructive bridge to generalized curvature reduction in non-compact spaces. She turned to the screen and traced a segment with her laser pointer. This term here noticed the use of nested asymptotics. That's not just clever, it's visionary. And it's not something you find in textbooks. Now the murmurs grew louder. Even some of Rourke's senior fellows were nodding. Let me be clear, Sophia said firmly. This isn't just a solution. It's a statement, a rejection of academic gatekeeping, a reminder that truth, real truth, has no need for podiums or prestige. Rourke shot up from his seat and stormed down the center aisle. Behind the curtain, Marcus's hands clenched on the mop handle. Rourke's voice boomed. Dr. Langley, this is highly irregular. Sophia didn't blink. So was the math. But it was also correct. You cannot present anonymous work as legitimate theory. This is not a TED Talk, Dr. Langley. Then perhaps she said, turning to him, you should explain to the audience why this anonymous work passed every independent verification I submitted to the International Geometry Board last night. A hush fell. Rourke's face paled. You submitted this? Yes, Sophia replied, with no name attached, only the proof. Their reply this morning, she clicked again, revealing a projected email was unanimous. Whoever authored this deserves recognition at the highest level of mathematical achievement. The room exploded in murmurs. Then she added calmly, you once said only 4 people in the world could write like this. I suggest you look around, because one of them is in this room. Rourke turned slowly. That's when he saw him. Marcus, standing still in the back corner. Chalk dust on his pants. Face unreadable. Rourke's eyes narrowed. You. Sophia cut in voice, rising with quiet power. He didn't want the credit. He didn't want the stage. But he's earned more than this mop bucket. Marcus stepped forward slowly. Every eye turned. He looked at the board, not the crowd. Then at Rourke. I didn't come here to fight, Marcus said softly. Rourke scowled. Then what did you come for? Marcus looked to Sophia, then back at the chalkboard. I came to clean. That's all I ever do. Clean up other people's messes, floors, equations, my past. He turned to the crowd, voice steady but quiet. I left the Institute 17 years ago because I saw what math could do when used for power instead of truth. I came back because my daughter reminded me what it meant to be curious again. Sophia stepped beside him. And the rest of us, she said, looking to the crowd, need to remember what it means to be humble again. There was silence. Then slowly someone clapped. Then another. And another. Until the entire hall thundered with applause, not polite, not performative, but real. Raw. Marcus stood frozen for a moment. Then he lowered his head. Later, as the crowd filed out and the Institute buzzed with the kind of energy usually reserved for Nobel rumors, Rourke cornered Sophia in the hallway. You've made a mess, he hissed. She smiled. No, I just stopped cleaning up after yours. That night, Marcus and Ellie walked home in the golden wash of street lamps. Ellie skipped ahead, backpack bouncing. Were people mad? Marcus shrugged. Some. Were they happy? He thought about it. Some. Ellie grinned. Were you proud? Marcus looked up at the stars. I think I was seen. Ellie took his hand. I saw you first. Marcus stood in front of the blackboard in his apartment, unmoving. The chalk hung in his hand like a weight, not a tool, not a weapon, not even a comfort. A weight. The events of the day replayed in his head like an old war film, one frame at a time. Sophia's voice echoing through the lecture hall, Rourke's stare cutting through the crowd, applause crashing like waves around him, but none of it felt real. What felt real was the piece of paper Ellie had taped to the fridge. My daddy is a math ninja. Crayon bold orange stars around the letters. That was real. Sophia arrived just before 9 p.m. She didn't knock. She just tapped lightly on the doorframe and waited. Marcus opened the door with a tired nod. His hair was still tied back from the day's shift, sleeves rolled up to the elbow. Sophia stepped inside and froze. There it was, the now famous blackboard, covered in equations, fractals, maps of logic that looked like constellations in chalk. In the corner, a child-sized stool with tiny chalk handprints, and beside it, a miniature drawing of two stick figures holding hands. You weren't lying, she murmured. Marcus shrugged. Not much worth lying about anymore. She walked closer to the board. This one, she pointed to a partial equation. You're expanding on the harmonic divergence from the lecture. Ellie said it looked unfinished, Marcus said, voice flat. She was right. Sophia turned to him. You know what's coming now, don't you? Marcus exhaled through his nose. A committee, a press request, a scandal. Maybe a medal, maybe a hearing. Definitely more chalk. She almost smiled. You're not surprised I've lived long enough to know that silence doesn't last. Not if you leave truth lying out in the open. He paused. And I left a lot of chalk dust behind. Sophia took a deep breath. I'm sorry, she said. Marcus blinked. For what? For putting you on that stage. For making you visible again. He shook his head. You didn't make me visible. You just pointed where I was already standing. She sat down on the old armchair across from him. You could still walk away, she said softly. You have that right. Marcus leaned against, the bored eyes hollow. I did walk away, he murmured. Once. And something in me died when I did. Sophia's gaze held his. You still blame yourself for what happened in Fallujah. Marcus didn't answer. She continued. You were a mathematician working in a war zone. They asked you to build a model. You built it. It failed. That's not on you. No, Marcus whispered. It's worse than that. I knew it might fail and I ran the math anyway. His voice cracked. They told me we could minimize collateral unpredictability. That phrase still echoes. And I, God help me, I believed them. Silence filled the room, thick and old. Then a small voice floated from the hallway. Daddy Marcus turned. Ellie stood there, pajamas, half-buttoned, eyes wide and uncertain. Were you crying? Marcus knelt down, blinking hard. No, baby. Just remembering. She shuffled forward barefoot on the tile. Is it the war stuff again? He nodded slowly. Does it still hurt? He tried to smile. Some days more than others. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tissue, handed it to him solemnly. Then said, You don't have to be sad to be smart, Daddy. Marcus laughed softly. I'll try to remember that. But Ellie didn't leave. She glanced between him and Sophia, then asked, Are you still not telling people you're a genius? Sophia chuckled. He told quite a few people today. But he still didn't write his name, Ellie said, pointing to the blackboard. He always signs things, ML. That's not fair. Marcus looked at her. I'm not ashamed of my name, he said quietly. Then why are you hiding it? She challenged. Sophia's eyes met his. There was no judgment in her expression, only understanding. Ellie's lower lip quivered. Are you hiding from me too? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He stood, walked over to the board, and picked up a fresh stick of chalk. In the bottom right corner of the proof in progress in clean, elegant script, he wrote Marcus David Lee, then turned to Ellie. Not anymore. Later that night, after Ellie had drifted to sleep beside her notebook of spirals and stars, Marcus and Sophia stood at the window. She's exceptional, Sophia said. She's my mirror, Marcus replied. She sees the parts I still won't face. Sophia hesitated. She told me something today. Oh, she said, my dad isn't just good at math. He's good at being brave even when nobody's watching. Marcus stared out at the night sky. A satellite blinked in the distance. I'm not sure I deserve that kind of faith. No one ever is, Sophia said. But it's the only kind that matters. Just before she left, she turned at the door. You're going to have to stand up soon, Marcus, in front of more than just students. Rourke's already pushing back. He's furious. He should be. You ready to fight? Marcus glanced at the blackboard, then toward Ellie's room. No, he said. But I'm ready to stop running. The morning fog clung to the glass windows of the institute, like a veil softening the sharp lines of the towering building that had until now quietly kept its secrets. But something had shifted. It wasn't just the hallway whispers or the unusually packed common areas. It was the feeling a tremor beneath the marble floors, a sense that someone had disturbed the order of things. Dr. Sophia Langley arrived early, her coffee untouched in one hand, a leather folder under her arm. As she passed the west corridor, she noticed the tension in the air faculty grouped together in tight knots, students whispering over printouts, eyes flicking toward the closed boardroom doors. She didn't need to ask what was happening. Inside that boardroom, General Rourke was holding an emergency meeting of the Scientific Integrity Council, hoping to smother the fire that Marcus had lit before it could burn too brightly. Sophia didn't flinch. She had expected this, but she hadn't expected what came next. At exactly 9:14 a.m., a small knock echoed on the boardroom door. It wasn't firm. It wasn't insistent. Just soft, rhythmic, almost curious. Rourke, in mid-sentence, stopped. The room fell silent. The door creaked open. And in walked Ellie. Her red hoodie was slightly too long sleeves covering her hands. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her small backpack bounced with every step. She carried something rolled in a rubber band. Rourke blinked. Who let a child, excuse me? Ellie said, clearly stepping into the center of the room. I made this for you. She pulled the rubber band from the rolled sheet of paper and carefully unrolled a large diagram, hand-drawn in pencil, covered in curves, folds, and labeled lines. At the top, in bold letters, was scrawled, "The third-level asymmetry solution. Daddy says it's a maybe." Rourke's jaw clenched. What is this? Dr. Emerson, one of the oldest members of the council, leaned forward and adjusted his glasses. His eyes scanned the paper. Wait. This can't be. He stopped mid-breath. This extension redefines the axis constraints from the original Barlow-Takahashi structure. A younger researcher stood up. She's introducing an iterative geometric inversion, a loopback that was impossible under classical symmetry. Ellie stood calmly, hands behind her back. Daddy said the problem was about shapes being scared to talk to each other, so I made them play together. Sophia, who had arrived just behind her, stepped forward, stunned. Ellie, how did you? I heard you say the math was missing something, Ellie explained. So I asked the triangle what it wanted. No one in the room spoke. Rourke, red-faced, slammed his palm on the table. This is absurd. A child's doodle doesn't belong in this room. Ellie didn't blink. Then maybe the room's too small. Outside the boardroom, dozens of students and staff had gathered. Word had spread. Someone had seen Ellie carrying the scroll. Someone else had overheard the shouting. The crowd grew. Inside, Emerson stood up holding the diagram. This is more than just a child's drawing, he said. There's an intuitive leap here, a conceptual reframing. This could collapse the long-standing constraints on third-degree asymmetry. He turned to Rourke. And we have you to thank for almost burying the mind behind it. Rourke stood voice like gravel. You want to give a child co-authorship of a breakthrough paper, Sophia crossed her arms. Why not academia was built on the idea that truth belongs to those who seek it, regardless of age, title, or uniform. And what if the math is wrong? Then we'll disprove it. But we won't dismiss it without reading it. The boardroom door opened again, this time gently. Marcus stood there, breathing slowly, his eyes sweeping the room. Ellie, he said softly, I told you to stay in the lounge. I had to show them, she said, stepping back toward him. They don't believe you, but maybe they'll believe me. Marcus looked at Sophia. She nodded. It's already in motion. 3 hours later, the entire institute gathered in the main lecture hall, students, professors, visiting fellows. On the projection screen behind Sophia, Ellie's hand-drawn diagram had been scanned and enlarged. Its imperfections remained eraser smudges, crooked lines, but none of that mattered. Because the math worked. It didn't just work, it sang. A previously inaccessible route through the third-order asymmetry matrix had been reimagined through what Ellie called folded friend logic. What began as childlike metaphor had become a new entry point into geometric analysis. As Marcus stood in the back, Ellie at his side, the hall erupted into applause. Sophia took the stage with a quiet smile. We're not here to debate who deserves a title, she began. We're here because a janitor with a broken past and a daughter with crayons reminded us that genius doesn't ask permission. She looked toward the back of the room. Truth doesn't need a title, but sometimes it needs a child's heart. Later that evening, in the quiet of their apartment, Marcus placed the scanned version of Ellie's diagram into a folder labeled Ellie's Theorems, Volume 1. She sat beside him, munching apple slices, watching cartoons. Daddy, yes, Bug. Do you think I'll get in trouble for writing math without a degree? He chuckled. Probably. But if they come knocking, just say your dad taught you everything you know. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I'll say we figured it out. He kissed the top of her head. That's even better. In a dusty office at the edge of campus, Rourke poured himself a whiskey. Alone. He glanced at the news bulletin flashing across his screen. Anonymous proof. Extended by 7-year-old Institute reconsiders. Gatekeeping practices. His face darkened. The story wasn't his anymore. And he knew it. They didn't fire him. At least not officially. The memo arrived on a Friday afternoon, folded in half and slipped under the apartment door, like an afterthought. No salutation. No signature. Just bold letters stamped at the top. Effective immediately, Mr. Marcus Lee's services as facilities staff are no longer required. Security clearance revoked. Badge deactivated. No hearing. No explanation. Just silence. And exile. Marcus stood at the edge of the apartment kitchen, the paper in one hand, the other braced against the wall like it might collapse. His body didn't move, but his mind spun tight, hot, dizzying. He had seen this before, not in form, but in spirit. The quiet betrayal, the weaponization of procedure, the way institutions bleed you out with politeness. Are we in trouble? Ellie's voice came from the couch where she was building tetrahedrons out of toothpicks and marshmallows. Marcus turned, slowly hiding the paper behind his back. No bug. Then why do you look like that? Like what? Like the board's broken, and you don't know how to fix it. Sophia arrived 20 minutes later, breathless, coat half zipped. I just saw it, she said. They didn't even copy me. I had to find out through the department assistant. Marcus, this is retaliation. Of course it is, Marcus said, flatly, setting the letter on the table like it might explode. Sophia paced. You presented a threat to the system. You didn't play by the rules, didn't bow to the hierarchy. They're punishing you because they can't admit they were wrong. He said nothing. She stepped closer. You need to fight back. Marcus shook his head. And do what file a grievance beg to keep a mop and a keycard. This isn't about your job. It's about justice. Justice, he said with a bitter laugh, doesn't pay rent. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at the window watching the street lamps flicker in the fog, his fingers gripping the armrest of the chair like a lifeline. The war had taught him how to survive explosions, but betrayal that came with quieter debris. And somewhere under it all shame stirred, not at losing the job, but at believing for even a moment that truth might be enough. The next morning, Lucienne Park showed up at the apartment with a briefcase, 3 lattes, and the force of a hurricane in a tweed suit. I heard what Rourke pulled, he said, pushing past the door before Marcus could protest. It's disgusting, unethical, possibly illegal. Sophia followed behind eyes lit with fury. He's trying to erase you again. Lucienne dropped the briefcase on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside were printed statements, security footage, stills, copies of Marcus's mathematical annotations, all carefully time-stamped and collated. I've been preparing for this since the moment you stepped into that lecture, Lucian said, because I knew the Institute wasn't going to accept you without a war. Marcus frowned. What is this A declaration, Lucian said, of intellectual property, of authorship, of every single line of chalk you've ever written under this roof? He handed Marcus a folder. And this is a joint letter signed by 30 faculty members and visiting scholars demanding your reinstatement recognition and formal invitation to present at the upcoming Global Geometry Symposium in Berlin. Marcus didn't open it. He just stared at the paper, then at Lucian, then Sophia, and finally at Ellie, who peeked from her room, her eyes wide. You think I care about conferences? Marcus asked quietly. No, Lucian replied. I think you care about truth, and what happens when it's buried. Marcus looked down at his hands. Every time I've stood up, he whispered, something has been taken from me. Sophia stepped forward. Not this time. That afternoon, the 3 of them walked into the Institute, not with a protest, but with proof. Lucienne distributed the materials to press contacts. Sophia called a town meeting of faculty. And Marcus, he simply walked to Lecture Hall B3. The room was empty. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote, I am not your threat. I am your mirror. Then he added a signature. Marcus D. Lee. Rourke stormed in moments later, face red with fury. You don't belong here. Marcus turned calm. I bled for this country. I bled for your systems. I rebuilt my life from a pile of ash with a mop in one hand and a daughter in the other. Rourke opened his mouth, but Marcus didn't stop. I've lived through mortar fire drone errors and memory loss, but nothing has been harder than trying to prove to men like you that I deserve a place at the table. Sophia stepped beside him. He doesn't need your permission, General. Lucian followed. And neither does the truth. Rourke's voice cracked. You think one janitor can upend the hierarchy of this institution? From behind them, a door creaked open. Ellie walked in, holding her notebook of impossible problems. She handed it to Rourke. No, she said. 2 janitors. The next morning, the national press picked up the story. The headline read, War Hero Turned Janitor Sparks, Academic Uprising Math Community Divided, and in small font below 7-year-old daughter's theorem, stuns experts. At breakfast, Ellie sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, scribbling on a fresh sheet of paper. "What are you working on now?" Marcus asked. "A bridge," she said, tongue between her teeth. "A bridge between two islands that don't know they're connected yet." He smiled. "Sounds like a good problem." "It's not a problem," she said. "It's a maybe." Marcus nodded. "Because maybe. That's where all miracles begin." The banners read, NIPM, Fall Symposium, Unattributed, Works Welcome. They flapped in the brisk October wind, white letters on navy blue, bold and proud. But the real statement wasn't in the signage. It was in the very idea that such a symposium existed at all. Because for the first time in its 94-year history, the National Institute of Pure Mathematics was holding a symposium where names didn't matter. No affiliations, no credentials, just math. Pure, anonymous, unfiltered. The auditorium filled early. Fellow skeptics, students, and silent supporters, some from as far as Cambridge and Kyoto, crowded the halls driven by one unshakable question. What if we've been ignoring the best minds simply because they weren't wearing the right name tag? Marcus Lee sat in the second row, hands clasped. He wore no suit, no badge, just a worn navy shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, a faint chalk smudge across the shoulder. Beside him sat Ellie, her legs swinging over the edge of the seat, a notebook on her lap, a pink pencil with a broken eraser gripped in one hand. Behind them, Lucienne Park and Dr. Sophia Langley murmured final checklist items. Sophia was moderating the day's sessions. She caught Marcus's glance and gave him a nod. He returned it with something between gratitude and disbelief. The lights dimmed. Sophia stepped to the podium. No title slide, no bio, just a screen that read, Session I proofs that spoke for themselves. Her voice rang steady through the hall. Today we strip away prestige, we let logic lead. Every equation you see has been submitted without attribution. No author, no university, just ideas. A pause. If that threatens, you ask why. And with that, the room leaned forward. The first presentation was a towering rearrangement of the Poincare conjecture into a topological framework suited for real-world application. The second, a strange but elegant approach to prime number prediction using modular rotational matrices. Then came the third presentation. It began with a blank slide. Then slowly, a handwritten diagram appeared. A black and white scan. Curves nested within curves. A child's handwriting in the margins. The heading, A Friendly Way to Think About Third-Degree Asymmetry, by Ellie, and maybe Daddy. The room fell silent. Then line by line the proof unfolded, animated with care. It wasn't polished like a PhD dissertation, but it held genius in its bones. Gasps echoed through the room. One professor murmured, This breaks the standard constraints on mirror-fold field alignment." Another whispered, "It's like she played with the math until it told the truth." Sophia stepped back onto the stage. The authors of this submission do not carry degrees. They do not sit on boards. But their theorem was verified by 3 independent review panels and met every criteria of structural integrity and originality. She paused. They are not here for accolades. They are here because they believe truth deserves a voice. And then, without flair or announcement, Marcus and Ellie stood. The auditorium rose with them. Not all clapped. Some stared. Some whispered. But the wave of sound that followed was thunderous, not just for the math, but for what it meant. During the break, Marcus lingered near the rear corridor. He had no taste for mingling, but the hallway found him anyway. An elderly woman with a soft French accent approached. "Monsieur Lee, I read your variation on harmonic boundary redefinition. My husband died trying to prove that. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. No, she smiled. He would be so happy to be proven wrong. Then a young man from Chile, a teacher from Morocco, a retired physicist from Minnesota. One by one, they thanked him not just for the math, but for giving them permission to still matter, to still try, to still dream. Back inside, General Rourke stood alone near the back, his face unreadable, arms crossed. He hadn't been invited, but he came anyway. When Marcus saw him, he walked over. No words at first, just silence. Finally, Rourke said, "You got your applause, your redemption." Marcus looked at the stage, then down at Ellie, who was now showing her theorem to 2 graduate students kneeling beside her. "I didn't come for applause," Marcus said. "Then what for witnesses?" he replied. "So when she grows up, no one can say she didn't belong." Rourke's jaw tightened. "You've made enemies today." Marcus met his eyes. "I've already faced worse." Then he turned and walked away. That night back at the apartment, the blackboard was clean again. Ellie stood on the stool, writing slowly in pink chalk. Marcus leaned against the doorway. "What's that?" she grinned. "A new problem, hard one." "Maybe. I'm making it up as I go." He nodded. "Those are the best kind." She stepped back, revealing her new title. "How many shapes does it take to make a family?" Below it, she drew a triangle, then a square, then a heart. Marcus swallowed hard. She turned to him. "Want to help me solve it?" He walked over, picked up a piece of chalk, and whispered, "With everything I've got." The letter was written in pencil, on ruled notebook paper, with the faint imprint of a cartoon dinosaur watermark bleeding through from the back. The handwriting was crooked in places with letters, sometimes leaning into each other, like they were whispering secrets. But every word was clear, deliberate, heartfelt, and impossible to ignore. To the Secretary of Education, "Hi, my name is Ellie Lee. I'm 7.5. My dad used to clean floors at the math place. Then he solved a big problem and they got mad. They said he couldn't teach because he wears an apron instead of a suit. That doesn't make sense. He's really good at math. He taught me about fractals and folding time, not the real kind, just with paper. If a person can explain math better than the people with titles, I think they should be allowed to teach, even if they don't have the right badge, even if they cry sometimes. My daddy says math is for everyone. I think school should be too. Thank you for reading. Love, Ellie." Sophia found it sitting on her desk Monday morning, folded like an origami star. No fanfare, no envelope, just a sticky note attached that read, "I don't know how stamps work yet. Can you send this for me, E?" By Wednesday, the letter had reached a deputy assistant in D.C. By Thursday, it had landed on the desk of the secretary herself. And by Friday morning, the world had seen it front page of the Washington Post, accompanied by a headline that read, "From mop to mind, a child's plea to let her father teach." Marcus first saw it when he walked into the corner diner to pick up breakfast. The TV was muted, but the caption was there. His name. Ellie's name. The Institute's name. He froze. By the time he reached the apartment, his inbox had gone from 3 unread messages to 987. Sophia was already pacing his living room when he walked in. "You have interview requests from NPR Scientific American and something called the Learning Channel," she rattled off. "There are funders offering to sponsor an independent teaching program. A petition with over 40,000 signatures is demanding your reinstatement." Marcus blinked. Because of Ellie's letter, Sophia held it up. Because of truth, written in the only language people still believe a child's clarity. Lucian arrived moments later, laptop under one arm, 2 coffees in the other. "Guess who just resigned?" he said, practically giddy. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Lucian handed him a printed memo. "Effective immediately, Director Rourke has tendered his resignation from the National Institute of Pure Mathematics." The rest was bureaucratic white noise, but the headline hit like thunder. That afternoon, Marcus stood again at the institute gates, not as a janitor, not as a speaker, but as a man finally seen. The new interim director, a woman named Dr. Rivera, met him at the steps. "We'd like to offer you something," she said. "I'm not here for a title," Marcus replied. "This isn't about titles," she said. "It's about students." She handed him a document. Visiting Fellow, Distinguished Instructor Community, Mathematics and Conceptual Thinking. No degree required. No publications mandated. Only one condition: teach what you know and teach it well. The classroom was small. No fancy projector. No elevated stage. Just rows of tables, a whiteboard, and a group of people aged 12 to 72 sitting in folding chairs, notebooks open. Some were community college dropouts. Some were retired factory workers. Some were kids who hated math until this class. And standing before them was Marcus Lee. No badge, no uniform, just a quiet voice and a piece of chalk. "Today," he said, writing on the board, "we're going to talk about how math can heal." He paused. "But first, I want you to tell me what's broken." A silence. Then slowly, hands raised, and he began. Not with formulas, but with listening. Sophia sat in the back, watching. Ellie was beside her, doodling a new fractal on her sleeve with a washable marker. "He's really doing it," Sophia whispered. Ellie didn't look up. "I told you. He just needed a board that didn't erase him." Later that night, Ellie placed a new drawing on the blackboard at home. A triangle with arms hugging a circle. Below it, she wrote, "Math loves you, even if school didn't." Marcus read it, eyes misty. He knelt beside her. "You changed everything," he said. She tilted her head. "I thought you did." He shook his head gently. "No, I gave up a long time ago." She smiled. "But I didn't." The chalkboard arrived in a moving truck. It was larger than the one in the apartment, older, two-framed in dark walnut, with the faint ghost of equations past, still clinging to its surface, like a memory too stubborn to fade. At first glance, it looked out of place in the middle of the courtyard garden. But that was the point. The courtyard had once been a forgotten patch behind the west wing of the institute. Cracked pavement, dry soil, and a lone bench so rusted it squeaked when the wind touched it. But now it bloomed. Raised flower beds built from reclaimed wood curved gently around a new cobblestone path. Vines crept along a handmade trellis, and tucked in the corner beneath a freshly planted cherry blossom tree stood the chalkboard, mounted on a cedar frame that smelled of sawdust and spring. A sign read, "The Garden of Unfinished Ideas. All are welcome. All may write." Marcus stepped back, hands on his hips, surveying the transformation. Ellie stood beside him, holding a basket of chalk pieces she'd sorted by color. "Do you think people will come?" she asked. He nodded. "They will. Maybe not today, but they will." Sophia walked up, carrying a watering can, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied in a ponytail. She looked radiant in the morning light, not in a glamorous way, but in a real one. In a present way. She tilted her head at the board. "You finally got your classroom," Marcus smiled. "It's not mine, it's theirs." Classes had resumed at the institute, but something had shifted. For the first time in decades, there was a new elective listed on the bulletin board: math for the reluctant and the curious instructor, Marcus Lee Location Courtyard Blackboard. Rain or shine. No prerequisites. No tuition. The first session drew 5 people, the next 12. By the third week, they were bringing their own chairs. Some came with college degrees. Others came with questions. All of them came with something broken. Marcus didn't lecture. He asked, "Where do you see patterns in your life? What problem keeps you up at night? What would you fold if truth could bend?" He used math not as a wall, but as a bridge between ages, cultures' wounds, and possibilities. And the chalkboard, weathered and forgiving, stood as a silent witness to every idea that dared to breathe. One crisp afternoon, a woman in a wheelchair rolled into the garden slowly. She watched from a distance as Marcus led a group in building a spiral with string and pebbles. When the session ended, she wheeled forward. "You don't remember me," she said. Marcus turned, eyes narrowing. She smiled. "Second deployment. Fallujah. You pulled me out of that collapsed clinic when everyone else said it was too late." Marcus blinked, breath catching. "Ramirez," she nodded. "I've been watching from afar, waiting to see if the man who saved lives in war would save something else when he came home." He looked down. She reached into her bag and handed him a sealed envelope. "What's this? Read it." "Later," she said. "But I'll give you the headline. It's an offer. To design math literacy programs for underserved veterans. National rollout. Full autonomy." Why me? Because she said, rolling back, no one trusts a general anymore. But everyone trusts a janitor with a chalkboard and a daughter. That night, under the golden spill of the courtyard lanterns, Marcus sat on the garden bench. Sophia sat beside him, her hand gently brushing his. They didn't speak for a long time. Ellie sat cross-legged in front of the board, drawing a large shape that looked like a flower folding into a cube. Around it, tiny stars and notes. "She's rewriting the Fibonacci sequence," Marcus said. Sophia laughed. "Of course she is." Then softly she added, "You know, you never did say no." "To what? To teaching? To starting again? To..." She paused. "To me." Marcus looked at her, really looked, then reached for her hand fully this time. "I didn't say yes either," he said, "because I was waiting for the right space." He glanced at Ellie at the board at the cherry blossom tree just beginning to bloom. "And I think this is it." Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. "Good." Later that week, Ellie stepped into the courtyard with a red ribbon in hand. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What's that for?" "It's for the ceremony," she said. "What ceremony?" "The math wedding," she said with a grin. "Where you and Dr. Langley get married and promise to solve weird problems together forever." Marcus laughed. "Is that what she told you?" "No," Ellie said. "But she looks at you like you're her favorite unsolved equation." Sophia, overhearing from the path, just smiled and kept watering the garden. The next morning when Marcus returned to the board, he found a message scrawled in neat block letters across the bottom. "You once said, math can't protect you from everything. Maybe not, but it can rebuild you when the world forgets how to." SL. He stared at the chalk for a long time, then picked up a piece of yellow and wrote beneath it, "And maybe it can teach us how to love again." ML. The autumn air was crisp, scented with drying leaves and late-blooming lavender from the garden beds that now surrounded the courtyard blackboard. Students came bundled in scarves. Retired postal workers arrived early to claim the sunny benches. Kids homeschooled or just curious came with wide eyes and spiral-bound notebooks. It was the final lecture of the semester. But it felt like more than that. There was no announcement, no event listing, just a quiet ripple through the community. "He's going to speak today, really speak." Marcus stood beside the blackboard with a piece of white chalk in one hand, Ellie's tiny blue one in the other. She clung to his side for a moment, then skipped away to sit beside Sophia, who was wrapped in a maroon shawl, smiling patiently. Behind them, the garden filled with familiar faces. Lucian Park, arms crossed with pride. Dr. Rivera seated in the back with a legal pad full of scribbled notes. Ramirez in her wheelchair nodding quietly. Even a few skeptical professors, who had once dismissed the idea that a janitor could think in proofs. Now they all waited, not for validation, but for truth. Marcus looked down at the chalk, then up at the crowd. "You've all been asking me the same question," he began. "And I think today's the day I finally try to answer it." He turned and wrote 3 words on the board. "What is genius?" He paused. "Is it speed? The fastest solution to a problem? The youngest person to solve a puzzle that stumped everyone else?" He shook his head. "Is it memory? The ability to recite 1,000 formulas, derive equations in your sleep?" A few people chuckled. Ellie beamed. "No," Marcus said. "It's none of that." He stepped back and drew a simple triangle. Then from one point he extended a curve, then another, bending gently toward the base. "This is what I think genius is." He drew a second, more jagged line, a path winding, doubling back, then finally reaching the same endpoint. "This is what most of us take." He circled the longer path. "And this is still genius. Because it didn't stop. Because it got there. Because along the way he tapped the curves, it picked up something the straight line missed." He turned to face them again. "I used to think genius meant being the best, the youngest, the first. That's what they told me when I was 17, and someone handed me a scholarship and said, 'Make something that wins wars.'" His voice trembled slightly. "And I believed them. I used math to predict human lives, ratios, probabilities, losses." The courtyard fell silent. "And then a little girl I never met died, because I trusted the model more than I trusted my own doubts." He looked at Ellie. "And after that, I didn't want to be a genius anymore." Sophia's eyes shimmered, her hand brushing Ellie's shoulder. Marcus continued. "But then this one," he nodded. Ellie started asking me to explain fractals using pancakes, to fold napkins into theorems, to draw spirals on the fogged-up bathroom mirror." He smiled faintly. "And suddenly, genius didn't feel like power. It felt like play, like curiosity, like love." He turned back to the board. Wrote one more sentence. "Genius is humility in motion." Then he set the chalk down slowly. Applause didn't erupt. Not at first. It began with a quiet standing ovation from Lucian, then Sophia, then Ellie, who stood on her tiptoes and clapped with both hands, and feet squealing. "That's my dad." The crowd followed, rising together, not for spectacle, not for performance, but for something rarer: recognition, healing, wholeness. Afterward, the garden buzzed with warmth and chatter. Old professors debated softly beside street musicians who had wandered in from across campus. Children drew Euclidean patterns in the dirt with sticks. A former dropout shyly asked Marcus if he could audit the next class. Ellie climbed onto the bench and began teaching 2 teenagers how to fold a Mobius strip from a paper plate. "See," she said, "it has no inside or outside, just like good ideas." Sophia watched her arms crossed, a soft laugh escaping. "She's going to change the world," she said. Marcus joined her on the bench. She already did. Sophia leaned into him. "You know there's still a lot of work ahead. They'll challenge you. Some will still say you don't belong." Marcus nodded. "I'm ready." She smiled. "So, what happens next?" He looked around. At Ellie, at the board, at the people still lingering in the golden afternoon, then at Sophia, and said quietly, "We build." That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, Ellie sat cross-legged in front of the blackboard, humming to herself. She wrote a new heading in purple chalk: "The next problem we don't know we're ready for." Below it, she drew 2 figures, one tall, one small, walking hand in hand toward a path made entirely of symbols, curving into the horizon. Then she added a 3rd figure, smiling, hair tied back, holding the chalk. Inside the apartment, Marcus brewed tea while Sophia typed at the kitchen table, working on a new curriculum proposal titled Mathematics for the Forgotten and the Fearless. Outside, the wind stirred gently through the cherry blossoms, now fully in bloom. As the stars began to blink into view overhead, Marcus stepped outside, cup in hand. He sat in front of the blackboard, staring at the last line Ellie had drawn. He smiled. Then, almost without thinking, he reached for a piece of chalk and added 3 final words beneath it. Let's begin again. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. We read every one. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that it's never too late to begin again, please consider subscribing. We share stories like this every week, quiet miracles, second chances, and the kind of hope that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Thank you for spending time with us today. Truly. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep believing in the power of simple, quiet brilliance.